King Charles had ruled for 11 months when the letter arrived, not from a foreign dignitary, not from Parliament, but from a lawyer none of them had ever heard of, representing an estate none of them knew existed. Before we get into this, if you love royal drama with all the tension the palace never wants you to see, hit subscribe and join us here at the Royal Pulse. We break down the stories that never make the official press releases. Okay, back to the mess. It was delivered on the morning of the Founders' Day gala, tucked into the usual pile of correspondence like it belonged there. Queen Consort Camilla opened it herself, since Charles was still dressing. She read 3 lines and went completely sick still. It was addressed to her son, Tom Parker Bowles, and it named him, not Prince William, not Prince Harry, as the sole beneficiary of a private trust that Diana had set up 18 years earlier before her death. A trust no one in the family had ever been told about. A trust worth more than the Crown Estate's annual operating budget. Camilla's hands shook as she read it a second time, then a third, searching for a version of the sentence that didn't say what she thought it said. It didn't change. Diana, the woman she'd spent 2 decades being measured against, being found wanting beside, had left something behind. And she'd left it to Camilla's son. Not William, not Harry, Tom. By the time the gala began that evening, the letter was folded inside Camilla's clutch, and she still hadn't decided whether to tell anyone it existed. Founders' Day was the one event in the royal calendar that belonged entirely to Diana's memory. She'd started it herself, decades earlier, as a fundraiser for children's hospitals, and even in death, her portrait hung above the ballroom entrance every year, flowers fresh beneath the frame. Prince William arrived first with Princess Catherine at his side, her ice blue gown chosen deliberately. It was the same shade Diana had worn the very first year of the gala. Catherine understood, better than almost anyone in the family, that some nights required quiet tributes instead of loud declarations. William paused beneath his mother's portrait the way he always did, just a beat, just enough to remember. Then he moved into the room, shaking hands, playing the role the crown required of him. Charles and Camilla entered next. The applause was polite. It was always polite for Camilla, never warm. She'd learned to smile through it years ago. And then Tom arrived. Fashionably late as always, trailed by a small entourage from his television production company. He'd built a modest career out of hosting a cooking and travel show, the kind of gentle celebrity that made him popular with a certain crowd and invisible to serious royal watchers. He kissed his mother's cheek, complimented William on his tie with the kind of easy charm that always seemed to land slightly wrong in a room like this, and drifted toward the bar. He had no idea a letter with his name on it was sitting in his mother's clutch. Prince Harry wasn't there. He rarely was anymore. He'd built a life on another continent, deliberately far from cameras, from protocol, from a family he'd once described in an interview as beautiful from a distance and exhausting up close. His absence had stopped being news. It had simply become weather. The gala moved through its usual rhythm, the orchestra, the toasts, the auction for the children's hospital wing. Charles gave a short speech about his late wife's compassion, his voice steady, practiced, sincere in the way that only years of repetition can make sincerity sound. Camilla watched him from her seat, letter burning a hole through the lining of her clutch, and understood with total clarity that whatever she did next would define the rest of her life in this family. She found Lady Constance Whitmore near the coat check, away from the noise. Constance had been Diana's closest confidant for over 20 years, the kind of quiet, permanent fixture in royal life that outlasted marriages, coronations, and scandals alike. If anyone would know what this letter meant, it was her. "I need to ask you something," Camilla said, "and I need the truth, not the polite version." Constance's expression didn't change, which told Camilla everything before a single word was spoken. "You knew," Camilla said, "about the trust." Constance was quiet for a long moment. "Diana set it up the year Tom was born, before you and Charles were even, before any of that began. She didn't do it for you. She did it because she believed every child deserves security, regardless of whose blood runs in them." That's not an answer. Why my son? Why not her own? Because her own sons, Constance said carefully, were always going to inherit everything, the crown, the estates, the title. Tom would inherit nothing from this family, not by blood, not by name. She thought that was unfair to a child who hadn't chosen his circumstances any more than William or Harry had chosen theirs. Camilla felt something crack open in her chest, something between gratitude and fury, and she hated that both were true at once. "Does William know?" Constance said. "Diana wanted it kept quiet until the right time. I don't believe she ever decided when that time was." "Well," Camilla said, folding the letter back into her clutch with trembling fingers. It appears the lawyers have decided for her. The letter should have stayed private. Trust documents usually do. But trust lawyers have assistants, and assistants sometimes talk. And by the following morning, a financial journalist at a minor business paper had pieced together enough of the story to publish a single paragraph under the headline, "Late Princess's private trust names unexpected here." No names, no confirmed details, just enough to set the entire country guessing. By noon, palace switchboards were overwhelmed. By early afternoon, 3 major outlets had independently confirmed the beneficiary's identity through separate sources close to the estate's legal team. By evening, Tom Parker Bowles' name was trending above every royal in the family. William found out the way most of the country did, through a headline on his phone, sitting in his study with Catherine across from him reading through briefing papers. "Catherine," he said, voice flat, "did you know about this?" She looked up, saw his face, and set the papers down immediately. "Know about what?" He turned the phone toward her. She read it twice. "No," she said quietly, "I had no idea." William stood, paced to the window, and stared out at the darkening grounds for a long moment. "My mother," he said, left something to him, and told no one. "Not me, not Harry, him. William, she kept a secret from her own sons for 18 years. His voice cracked slightly on the word secret, and he hated that it did. "What else don't I know about her?" Catherine crossed the room and took his hand. "This doesn't erase anything she was to you. Whatever her reasons. I don't care about her reasons right now, Catherine. I care that everyone in this family seems to have known my mother better than I did." Charles called for a private family meeting the next morning. No advisors, no staff, just the 5 of them. Himself, Camilla, William, Catherine, and Tom, summoned by car in the early hours before the press could assemble outside the gates. Tom arrived looking like a man who hadn't slept. He hadn't. He'd spent the night fielding calls from his agent, his production company, and reporters who'd somehow gotten his private number. "I didn't ask for this," he said the moment he entered the room. "I didn't know it existed until this morning. Same as all of you. Nobody's accusing you of anything," Charles said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely certain that was true. William hadn't sat down. He stood near the fireplace, arms crossed, jaw tight in the way that had become familiar to anyone who'd watched him grow from a careful boy into a controlled, guarded man. "She never told me," William said, not looking at anyone in particular. 18 years, and she never told me she'd done this." "She was trying to be fair," Camilla said quietly, and immediately regretted it. Every head in the room turned toward her. "Fair," William repeated. "You knew? I found out yesterday, the same as everyone else." "That's not what I asked." Camilla met his eyes. "No, I didn't know before yesterday, but Constance did. Your mother told her, and only her, a long time ago." William's laugh was short and humorless. "Of course she did." Tom finally spoke. "I don't want it," he said. "The trust, whatever it is. I'll sign it back, give it to the hospital charities. I don't care. I never wanted to be part of a war I didn't start." "It's not that simple," Charles said gently. "Legally, it's already yours. Refusing it publicly would raise more questions, not fewer. People would assume we forced you to." "Then what do you suggest?" Tom's voice rose for the first time. "Because right now I'm the most hated man in the country for a decision my mother's predecessor made before I could walk." "She wasn't my predecessor," Camilla snapped, sharper than she intended. "She was his mother. That's all she ever was to me, the woman I could never live up to, alive or dead." The room went silent. It was Catherine, of all people, who finally broke the tension, not with an accusation, but with a document. "There's something else," she said carefully, pulling a folded page from her bag. "I found this among the estate papers this morning. Before we left, I think you all need to see it." She handed it to Charles, who read it, went pale, and passed it silently to William. It was a letter, the last one Diana had ever written, dated only weeks before her death, addressed to no one in particular, simply filed alongside the trust documents as an explanation for whoever eventually found it. William read it aloud, his voice unsteady. "If you're reading this, then the trust has finally come to light, and I imagine there is chaos around you right now. I am sorry for that. I never meant to hurt anyone by protecting a child who had no voice in his own circumstances. Tom did not choose his mother any more than William or Harry chose theirs. I only ever wanted to make sure that whatever happened between the adults in this family, no child would be left standing outside in the cold because of decisions they had no part in making. William, my darling boy, you have always had everything. Please, find room in your heart to understand why I made sure someone else did too." Nobody spoke for a long moment. William set the letter down on the table with careful, deliberate hands, as though it might break. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wet, and his anger had drained into something quieter and far harder to carry. "She wasn't choosing him over me," he said slowly, almost to himself. She was just being who she always was. Camilla, watching from across the room, felt the last of her defensiveness dissolve into something closer to grief. "I spent 20 years resenting a woman for being better than me," she said quietly. "And it turns out she was better than all of us." Charles addressed the nation 2 days later, not to explain the legal details of a private trust, which remained exactly that, private, but to say something simpler. "My late wife," he said, standing before the cameras with William and Camilla on either side of him, an image the papers would run for weeks, believed that kindness should extend beyond the boundaries of family, blood, or convenience. In her final act of generosity, she reminded all of us, myself included, what that actually looks like in practice. "I ask that the country extend the same grace to a young man who inherited a secret, not a scandal. It wasn't a full explanation. It didn't need to be. The public largely understood the shape of it. A woman who had given something meaningful to a child who wasn't hers by blood, out of a belief that no child should be left out in the cold." Tom gave one brief statement of his own, standing alone outside his production offices. "I'm not trying to take anything from anyone," he said. "I never wanted a war. I only want to honor what was actually a kindness, even if it didn't feel that way at first." The headlines softened within a week. Not entirely. Some things never fully do, but enough. William visited his mother's portrait alone one evening. Weeks later, the ballroom empty and quiet, the gala long over. "I used to think I knew you completely," he said softly, to no one, to everyone. "Turns out you were always bigger than what I let myself see." Behind him, Catherine appeared in the doorway, watching him for a moment before stepping inside. "Will you ever really forgive her?" she asked gently. William considered the question for a long time before answering. "There's nothing to forgive," he said finally. "She was just kinder than I gave her credit for. I think that's harder to sit with than anger ever was." Catherine took his hand, and together they stood beneath the portrait a while longer, the candlelight flickering softly across a painted face that had, in the end, one final lesson left to teach her son. The trust remained Tom's. He quietly redirected half of it to the same children's hospital charity, his mother by marriage, a title he'd never once used but somehow now felt closer to true, had spent her life supporting. Camilla, for her part, never fully shed the old ache of comparison. But something in her had shifted. She stopped flinching at Diana's name in conversation. She let her portrait hang without looking away. And the family, cracked but not broken, carried on, the way families in that particular kind of spotlight always eventually do, not by healing completely, but by learning to carry the weight together instead of alone. If you enjoyed this story, let us know in the comments which royal storyline you'd like to see next. And don't forget to subscribe here at the Royal Pulse.